Welcome to the Police and Crime Committee meeting. Today is the second part of our investigation into the probation services in London. Please make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any interruptions. Can I now ask our clerk, Lauren, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies for absence have been received from Assembly Member Moema and Assembly Member Garrett, for whom Assembly Member Rogers is substituting for virtually. We've also been joined virtually by Assembly Member Devonish and Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you, Lauren. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interests to declare? No, thank you. Can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of June 2022 to be signed by me as a correct record? Thank you. Can we note the completed ongoing and closed actions arising from previous meetings of the committee? Thank you. We now move on to our main item of business, the discussion on probation services in London. And I'd like to welcome our guests, Kilvinder, Vigurs. Have I pronounced that properly?
Vigurs.
Vigurs, I do apologise. Who's the Regional Director for the London Probation Service, Her Majesty's Prison and Probation Service. Will Balakrishan, I hope that's right.
Close-ish, Balakrishan.
Balakrishan, thank you. Director of Commissioning and Partnerships from MOPAC. And Commander Nick John, Head of Criminal Justice for the MPS. And as said by Lauren earlier, joining us virtually is Katie Lomas, National Chair of the National Association of Probation Officers. Thank you very much for attending today, and I'm going to start with the questions, if I may, and I'll address all of you. So I don't know, perhaps Nick, you'd like to start. Do you think the Reunified Probation Service provides a better model for delivering probation services in London? And if so, can you provide examples of how the service has improved over the last year?
Good morning. So I think it's fair to say that since the changes, we've seen or continue to see significant improvement in working relationships between the Probation Service and the MPS. We operate in partnership across a wide range of different areas, integrated offender management, electronic monitoring, violence reduction, intelligence, etc. And what we're seeing, continue to see, is those good relationships, both the operational tactical level as well as more strategically. There are, as I say, there are a number of really positive benefits to that, and we're starting to see that greater engagement because it's unified under one service as opposed to having two places to go. So in brief, we've absolutely recognised the benefits of coming together as the one service. There obviously are challenges around capacity, but that continues to be the case in both sides of the partnership. But as I say, we are grateful for the support that we continue to get working in partnership with the Probation Service as a whole.
Good. Well, that's good news. Will?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I echo what Nick says, actually. I mean, the Mayor always supported the reunification of probation, and we were pleased to be consulted at MOPAC on the new model before it went live. I think for us, the big difference is improving the role that London Probation can play in multi-agency work, particularly the capacity to involve with stakeholders. And I think post-unification, we've seen that just move on dramatically. I think about things like MARAC, I think about things like community safety partnerships, I think about things like integrated offender management, a lot of the violence reduction work that we're convening at MOPAC, but also in terms of data sharing, you know, just having one organisation be able to do that, I think makes a huge difference. I mean, it's too early to be objective yet. You know, we'll have to wait to see the reoffending stats. Obviously, there's quite a big lag, but I think everything's pointing in the right direction. I think another thing that's really important is thinking about, say, reducing teenage homicides. We know from some recent analysis that often those whose violence escalates are medium-risk offenders. So if you can imagine the old model, those medium-risk offenders would have been with the CRC. Now they're with probation, so we've got those offenders under one national service. That just makes it much easier for us as a partnership to respond to escalations in risk, and I think that's pretty crucial for public protection. So all in all, we really welcome the changes.
Good. Okay. Well, it's something we're going to be keeping an eye on, so stats will show as we go along. Kilvinder, what do you think?
Thank you. Yes, absolutely echoing what Nick and Will have said. And, you know, in essence, I'm marking my own homework here, aren't I, as being the kind of director of the one organisation. But I do think echoing the same about one voice as a probation service, so that things are much more streamlined, much more effective. Having one system, whether it be IT systems, whether it be having one person at a community safety partnership board instead of two, whether it be having two separate operating models for IOM, we just have one. And also the commissioning opportunities we've had, being able to deliver on a women's service across London, working really closely with MOPAC on that, and the Women's Blueprint, I think, is just a really good example of how we're able to deliver one model across London. And there's lots of other examples which I'm sure will come out today. Picking up the point from Nick in relation to the working with the Metropolitan Police, again, the efficiencies around sharing information, so I'm sure it's just easier for the police to go to one head of service, one senior probation officer. So there's efficiencies in the merger. There's also value for money for the taxpayer. So yes, I think the unification has been positive.
Well, that's all really good. In our meeting on the 22nd of June, we heard repeatedly that under the reunification, probation officers' caseloads were far too high to allow them to do their jobs effectively. So what action are you taking on that, Javinder?
It's not just about probation officers. I inherited a vacancy rate of about 600 from the private sector, from the CRC. In the actual National Probation Service, we had reduced that gap significantly. The biggest gap is for our probation service officers, who carry far more cases. The difference is the probation officers carry the more complex, risky cases. We've got a really strong pipeline of getting probation officers into the workplace. I have something like over 200 trainees in the business at the moment, 60 just qualified last month. I have another 70 qualify in October. Next April, I'm taking 180. Very positive in terms of that pipeline. We are on mass recruitment drive for our administrators. We're looking at a completely different model in London to have a service centre approach, which the CRC used to use and was very, very positive. So we want to take some of that innovation from the private sector and develop that. And we need to recruit just under 300 probation service officers. We need to put them in our prison resettlement teams. After unification, a number of people didn't want to work within the civil service, didn't want to do the work that is required under the remit of the probation service and left. And that means we've got huge gaps in our resettlement work, so a huge drive to get people in there, a huge drive to get people to do our unpaid work, supervisors. So that's how you get the 600. So huge recruitment drive, and then bringing them in cohorts so that we can provide some comprehensive learning and development so that we keep them as well, rather than just trying to land 600 in one day.
Yes, because in the past I've read that your retention rates have been really bad, haven't they?
Yeah, it depends on each grade as well. I think part of the problem is the cost of living in London, and I think a lot of public sectors experience the same experience. So people can get paid more in different departments and in different organisations in London. So there's more opportunities for our colleagues in London to move on to do different things. And some of the attrition rate is to work in the Ministry of Justice, HMPPS elsewhere, or even just out of London.
Okay, and it's the fact that they're also in an experience, really. Is that giving you any problems?
It does, but actually I think the biggest impact of that has been COVID and people working remotely. I think we've got to remember that we carried on as key workers providing a frontline service, but on a rota basis, so sometimes the experienced staff we have weren't in the offices at the same time as some of our inexperienced offices. So we're moving to have, and have been doing for a number of months, getting the experienced offices in the buildings again with our new staff, because you learn on the job as a probation officer, as a probation service officer. And so whilst we want the people to be able to work flexibly at home and in the office, what we're missing is people in the office to give advice. So I think it's a 50-50 in terms of experience levels. We still have a significant number of people who are vocationally led, who want to be doing the work they do, and we need them to support the trainees coming in.
Okay. I mean, had there been any specific issues implementing this new model that have given you concern?
I think it's time. The way I put it, I mean, people talk about June, but it was end of June. From a central level, the contracts were signed off, and that's when we started to do the groundwork in July. So for every department the NPS had, the CRC had a department. So we had to merge those. So we had to recruit the top tier, you know, my regional leadership team, my operational leadership team. We had to reconfigure our performance and quality teams, just as some examples. So bringing two into one has taken us some time, and then still been delivering the frontline service. I think one of the challenges, including the vacancy rate, has been the IT systems. So the London CRC had a completely different IT system to National Probation Service. So it's really taken, 6 to 7 months for those practitioners to learn the systems. And again, you learn it as you use it, because there's so many component parts to all the different digital systems in HMPPS. So I think those are probably the bigger challenges.
Okay, so given those challenges and of course recruitment and problems like that, when are you forecasting that you'll be full speed ahead with it going exactly as it should do?
I used July till March to focus on the mobilisation, stabilisation. So by the 1st of April, albeit the vacancies that we have to understand, and that's why we're working on prioritising probation, which in essence is triaging all our cases to make sure resources follow risk. We have a firm delivery plan starting from the 1st of April. The reality is we've got Her Majesty's Inspectorate with us at the moment. They announced they were coming to us a few weeks ago. The unfortunate issue is they're picking a sample of cases 6 months after the merger. So our previous HMIP reports had come out as inadequate, and I think sampling cases 6 months after the merger is going to show that things won't have moved on, because people are learning those new IT systems. We hadn't got the learning and development plans in place. So again, I think that's going to be a challenge for us going forward, because actually the systems were put in place ready by the 1st of April this year.
Well, no doubt you'll be able to comment on the report anyway, but
yeah.
Let's see how that goes. Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, panel. If I can ask you, Kilvinder, I think to some extent you already sort of answered this question, but all the 6 probation services that have been reviewed by Her Majesty's Inspectorate for Probation since reunification have been deemed as requiring improvement. So how would your service fare if it was inspected tomorrow?
I think it would be similar. I think if you take a snapshot of where we were in June last year, and just before then, and you separated out the inspection reports and even our internal audits, you would see that the CRCs were faring less well. They were poorer. So on the merger in June, July, the inspection case audits are the similar cases. So they're inspecting cases that haven't had the opportunity for our colleagues to have adapted to the new systems and the new learning and development. So there is an argument, a challenge around picking case samples at a point where we've just merged. So that's the challenge. I would like to see, we've got a plan in place, the recruitment plan, the learning and development plan. I'd like to see the Inspectorate come back in 12 months to see where all those probation regions are at being allowed to deliver on those plans and then being inspected.
Okay, and the other question I had was, we heard from a number of stakeholders that notwithstanding the difficulties they faced, there were innovative and positive aspects to the CRC model. Would you agree with this? And if so, how are you ensuring that learning is retained and incorporated into the new model?
Yes, so I talked about the service centre approach. That was an innovation London CRC developed, and we've kept that. A number of the CRC colleagues are part of the leadership team, so they've come with their experiences, so capturing them in that way. Looking at the digital systems that they were using and how we can develop those. Looking at the different ways that they've worked with different cohorts of people, sharing that learning. So one of the key people in our learning and development team was in the CRC, so she's been able to bring her experience of that. So we've got a blended approach at the leadership table. There isn't a dominance of the previous National Probation Service. We've made sure that the whole leadership team is a blended one.
Okay, now I'd like to ask the very first question to Katie Lomas, who is the National Chair of National Association of Probation Officers, who's joining us remotely. Katie, the original question was, do you think the Reunified Probation Service provides a better model for delivering probation services in London, and can you provide examples of how the service has improved over the last year from your perspective?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for inviting me to speak. And although I have a national role in NAPO, I'm the link officer for our London branch, so meet regularly with our members who work in London and see a perspective on a national level and locally for London as well. So I think there are a few things to say about what happened to probation last year, and I know that a lot of people use the language that Kilvinder's been using and call it a merger, but it wasn't a merger. The CRCs, their contracts were ended. They ceased to exist apart from for ongoing contractual reasons. And the work that they were doing and the staff who were doing that work were transferred into the National Probation Service, which was renamed on the same day as the Probation Service. But what actually happened was that those staff were transplanted into an organisation that worked very, very differently. And there's clearly going to be a period of adjustment. There are always going to be things that people need to learn, new ways of working, systems which Kilvinder, I think, has explained, will be new and different. And that is always going to be challenging and take time. However, the wider context of this happening during a pandemic, where we were working on exceptional delivery models, so we weren't delivering our services as normal, and the huge staffing issues in both organisations that were unifying together, I think that context explains why we're still not seeing a level of operation in the probation service that would be expected. And I just wanted to pick up on a few particular items. One is that a lot of the learning and development that has been offered to staff, both the staff transferring and the existing staff that came from the National Probation Service, it is online learning that is offered to them. It's not delivered, I don't think, in a way that we would recognise as best practice for learning and development, and especially given the drive to bring people into the workplace together so that more experienced and less experienced staff, or staff with different types of experience from different settings, can learn from one another. Sitting on your own at a computer, watching a video and then doing an online test at the end of it doesn't really, I think, give the best. And what the feedback we've had from members about their learning is that it's been quite poor, boring, I think, has been used quite a lot, frustrating and not giving them what they need, the tools that they need to do their work. And for that reason, there still remains an inconsistency in how cases are allocated. And so staff from the former National Probation Service are consistently allocated more higher risk and more complex cases than staff who transferred from the CRCs, because staff from the CRCs still need more support and learning and development in order to take on those more complex cases. Inevitably, there are things from the CRCs that have been continued, and a lot of those have been very positive. A lot of the partnership working, a lot of the ways of approaching work that the CRCs used have been continued, and that's really positive. But one thing that Kilvinder mentioned was the service centre approach to administration, and that's completely at odds with the national operating model for the probation service, because in the national operating model it's recognised that administration staff play a really, really important part in the frontline service delivery, and they should be located with their colleagues on the front line so that they get to know the people they're working with, they get to know the people on probation who those people are supervising, they can build those relationships and support the frontline operational staff in delivering the sentence management and intervention work for the people on probation who we are supporting. And the service centre approach, which is a very transactional approach to the delivery of administration, it disconnects a lot. It disconnects administration from service delivery, and that means that inevitably the probation officers and probation service officers will end up doing far more of the administrative work themselves, and that reduces their contact time with the people they're supervising. So all of those things, I think, are things that will take some time to improve. And other things that I think are working well are the fact that the service is unified. And a lot of the feedback from our members is that they are really pleased that the service is unified, but a lot of concern about their workloads, and workloads for probation officers in London typically 1.5 to 2 times their capacity. So people are doing, 1.5 to 2 people's work, and if your workloads are that high, there is no way that you can fulfill all of the expectations on you, and that is leading to much higher leaving rates, and London has higher leaving rates than other parts of the country for qualified staff, and not only because of the workload pressures, but also because staff can see that they can get better pay elsewhere for doing similar roles. Okay. And London is unfortunately a leader in those leaving rates.
Okay, thank you for that. Very briefly, because I'm mindful of moving us on, have you got any responses to that, Kilvinder?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think the main response is about the service centre, I think, because we've actually had feedback from people on probation who call the service centre, and the feedback from those individuals are saying they get an excellent service from that reception, and that the triaging from the service centre is better than when they call the reception at the office. It's really important to note that by no way at all are we removing case administrators from offices. What we are doing is managing the vacancies. So every probation office in London has carried significant admin vacancies, and also the agencies that we employ that cost us a lot of money. We can't manage them because when we have to performance manage them or something, they leave. So we're constantly churning agency staff, managing vacancies, which puts on far more pressure on our managers and our practitioners. So the model is, and it's been agreed nationally, that we will have case administrators working with those practitioners on the things that will support that day-to-day work with the service users, the people on probation. Okay. But separately, the service centres will take away some of the data administrative work that they have to, that the case administrators have to do. So it's a different model of working, but we're not removing all case administrators from offices. And we've used a lot of staff engagement, people on probation engagement, and lessons learned from the CRC.
Okay, thank you for that. Just a very quick answer really needed. When we're told that each practitioner has too many cases, how many people would you normally have as a caseload? How many should you have, and how many are some of these probation officers carrying?
We don't talk about case numbers anymore. We talk about a workload management percentage, which is at 100%. And it's important to note that is a workload management tool. It's not a measuring tool. And the reason we do that is because you could have 15 cases that are all high risk and very complex, but some of them could be in prison, so you're doing the pre-release work on them. If they're all in the community, then there's a lot more work to be done on them. So across London, there's 18 probation delivery units. Some of those delivery units are at the 100%, 110, 120.
Yeah, give us a flavour though. I haven't got a clue. Could that be 5 people?
No, it's usually about
people?
Between 15 and 20 in the community, but then they could have more who are in prison.
Okay, no, I get. We all understand that. It's just that I don't think any of us have any idea how many it would be. So thank you for that. I understand it's different. We're going on to the second section now, and that's delivering.
Chair, so sorry to interrupt, but I just have a clarification on what Kilvinder just said. The workload measurement tool actually is a measurement tool. It measures people's workload against their capacity. A typical full-time probation officer has around 35 to 40 cases, depending on their risk and complexity. There's no way that a full-time probation officer has 15 cases. It's 35 to 40 for a full-time probation officer working with high-risk complex cases in the community.
If I can come back really quickly. Sorry, I was saying 15 to 20 in the community, but more usually in prison. So they could have another 20 in prison. Okay. So in totality, definitely could have 40, 45 cases. So yeah, not disputing that.
And I expect every officer has got a different
and it's the complexity.
I get that. Okay, we're moving on to the second section, and my colleague, Assembly Member Russell, is going to lead on these. Caroline.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. Yes, so this is a new section about delivering the functions of the London Probation Service. So my first question is to Katie and to Kilvinder. At our first meeting on probation, we heard that pre-sentence reports lack the quality and insight of the offender's needs. Would you agree with that assessment? Katie, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you. Happy to. I do agree with that. And there is a reason for it, and that is a reason that was taken by HMPPS some years ago to reduce the number of pre-sentence reports delivered in a format that required an adjournment for an interview, information gathering, and the preparation of a written report. And there was a move to more and more on the day verbal reports. So of course, you're not going to get the in-depth analysis of somebody's needs if you don't actually have that time to interview them and gather information and prepare a report. So recently there has been a national move to move back to more adjournments for reports to get a better balance between the drive for speedy justice, which I think everybody appreciates, but you have to balance that with the need to get proper justice, and you don't get proper justice if you don't have a proper analysis of somebody's risk and needs when making a recommendation. So we saw a move that really limited the ability of probation staff to have the adjournment, do an interview, gather information, potentially a second interview if needed, before making a full report and recommendation to court. To much more shortened, adjourn until the afternoon and sit and have a chat with somebody, often in a corridor, just to say, are they suitable for this sentence that the court is considering? We absolutely, as a professional association, we're very much in favour of more full pre-sentence reports that require an adjournment. It doesn't always have to be a lengthy adjournment, but the balance between the need for speedy justice and the need to make a proper assessment and analysis has to be struck. And for us, especially where you have somebody who is to be sentenced and they may have complex needs, they may have mental health issues, especially for women, and anyone who has a family, you need to have that proper analysis of the impact of the sentence. Are we meeting their needs? Are we going to actually address their rehabilitation needs? Are we passing a sentence that actually will push them further away from desistance from offending because it will put them in an impossible situation? Are we causing ourselves as a society more problems by removing a critical parent from a family and creating another problem for the rest of the family? So all of those things, I think, need to be considered. We've had examples where adjournments haven't been allowed and therefore people have been given sentences which are inappropriate and unworkable in the community. We've had examples where people have been sentenced to curfew at an address which is wholly unsuitable because of risk to other people living at that address. We've had examples where people who are simply not able to do any work at all have been sentenced to unpaid work. We've got examples where people go to prison where a community alternative was absolutely available and would have been more effective than the short prison sentence they were given. So we could give any number of examples, but that adjournment, even a very short adjournment for a full pre-sentence report with a proper analysis is crucial. And we are pleased that there is a move back to that, but that creates its own issues. And you know, as Kilvinder's rightly been pointing out, there are staffing issues right across the probation service, but particularly in London, and increasing the amount of work that you're asking the court report writers to do will pull people away from the other work, because if you need more report writers, then you have to pull them away from other crucial probation work. So I think it will be some time before we see that rebalance, and there will continue to be the tension between the push for speedy justice and the need to make a thorough and careful analysis of risk and need, because it's those two things together that I think are crucial to making better sentencing decisions.
Thank you. That's incredibly clear. Kilvinder, did you want to add anything to that, or shall I move on to the next question?
I think I'd just add, I mean, and thank Katie for that comprehensive response, because I think that does show what's been happening over the decade. The only thing I would add is that we have some pre-sentence report pilots in London. The staff there have been trauma informed, focusing how to work with women, young people, young black people, and other people with protected characteristics. And what we want to be able to do is ensure that those pilots' learning is then cascaded across all the courts, and it's a national programme, and also access to more community rehabilitation requirements, so the investment being made in substance misuse, mental health, etc., to now allow us to make better proposals rather than the short prison sentences, which we all know don't work, that revolving door. So that's the only thing I would add.
So are there any particular emerging findings from the pre-sentence report pilot schemes that are there any others apart from the ones about that you mentioned, the drug rehabilitation element, but are there any emerging findings from those pre-sentence report pilot schemes that you're interested in, or that you think are particularly notable?
I think just picking up Katie's point, really, that they take longer to do. You know, you want a comprehensive report with somebody with complex needs. That doesn't take away that actually there are a significant number of reports that can be done as fast delivery that don't need the longer adjournments. So the basis of being trauma informed allows you to be more inquisitive, look at the particular areas of somebody's development, and that takes time to build up that trust in an interview process because you're asking some really personal questions. I would say, I should add, that we're doing some activities which is called activity benchmarking costs, where we're looking at the time it takes to do a good pre-sentence report, a good assessment, and all these activities build into what then goes into the workload management tool. And what we've seen in London and other areas is that our target staffing has increased considerably. So in essence, my vacancies increased because I've been told I need more staff to do the job. So that's a positive because of that healthy pipeline in terms of recruitment. You know, it is going to take between 10 and 12 months, but the fact that there's an acknowledgement that we do need more staff in our courts, in our pre-release teams, in our prisons, in our communities, running unpaid work, means that my target staffing has gone from something like 2,500 to 2,800 with an acknowledgement that we need more staff to do this work well.
Mm-hmm. So actually, yes, so sort of understanding how much work it takes to produce a decent pre-sentencing report enables you to be much clearer about the amount of staff required to fulfill that, rather than just, so it gives you a kind of an evidence base to say you need this many staff. Is that, have I understood you correctly?
Yes, I think you can extrapolate that from the pilots are showing the time it takes to do a good report, to understand the person they're interviewing and make a proposal that will deal with those complex needs and avoid people going to prison for short sentences, which is, you know, ultimately value for money as well for the taxpayer, because much more likely to be rehabilitated. Prison does cost more, and it'll break that cycle. And for women, supporting families as well, and young people not escalating into further crime.
Thank you. And then another question for you, Kilvinder, which is about the commitments in your reducing reoffending plans. So you had commitments to reduce the proportion of custodial sentences, particularly the short custodial sentences across all groups, including women and young people, increasing the use of community sentence treatment requirements, which require people to participate in community treatment to address underlying issues around substance use, mental health, alcohol consumption as an alternative to imposing custodial sentences, and increasing judicial confidence by engaging with the courts to foster collaborative problem solving and joint working. So my question is, what progress have you made against those commitments made in the Reducing Reoffending Plan to improve the quality of advice provided to courts by probation staff?
There are a number of strands to this. On one level, as the probation service, you know, we don't have that provision in-house. So we're around the commissioning tables now with community safety partnerships and the health and others. So we are recruiting a number of social and justice coordinators to work with us, and the drug agencies to make sure that we are supporting those commissioning opportunities. So we're providing our needs assessments, which we did earlier on this year. We're now around the table looking at increasing drug rehabilitation requirements. So it's at that commissioning stage where we're actually developing a service that's fit for purpose that will allow our court staff to make those referrals. We are making those referrals. We need to make more of those referrals and have a service that's fit for purpose. Also, mental health treatment requirements. We've got a pilot running for women at the moment that will be developed to include men. So we're at that early stages of market commercial commissioning, and hoping that we'll be able to move on that quite quickly.
Thank you. Now, my next question sort of picks up on the LAMI review found that transforming rehabilitation had led to specialist providers attuned to the needs of particular groups being squeezed out of probation delivery as they found very limited opportunities to be funded through the CRC supply chains. And the review also found a lack of accountability for probation services to meet the needs of people with protected characteristics, including people who are Black, Asian, or minority ethnic. So what are you doing, and this again is for Kilvinder and Kate, what are you doing to ensure probation provides a good service to people of all backgrounds? So Kilvinder, if you want to start.
Yes, so I think that's true. What was highlighted in the LAMI review, which was one of the many reasons that the probation service was unified. On unification, back in July last year, one of the departments that I was eager to set up was our community integration and contracts team. Over the last just under 12 months, we have actually engaged with 15 different third sector organisations. It has taken time because you're building a structure, working with commercial in the Ministry of Justice. We're in the moment negotiating how to provide more grants rather than co-commissioning. I could list a number of organisations. I'm not sure it's appropriate here. And I know this, for example, the Women's Service, that's still in the bidding process, so I'm not allowed to kind of get into detail about that. But there's organisations that we have worked with, like Clinks, and really focused in on organisations that are working with those with protected characteristics. I think one of the challenges is that there's resources there, there's a budget there, but it's attracting organisation on a local level in the 32 boroughs rather than pan-London. The part of and I read the minutes of the meeting in June with some of the charities. Part of the issue for us is that due diligence, that governance arrangements. Would that third sector charity be able to provide a service to that local probation office, covering sick leave, covering maternity leave? Do they have the financial wherewithal to manage the money that we could give them? So we've got to go through that process of due diligence to be able to engage with those organisations. We are looking a lot more at co-commissioning opportunities. I don't know if Will will be able to talk a little bit about that, but we've talked a lot about commissioning and co-commissioning long before unification happened, looking for the levers and the mechanistic way of doing this, in engaging the people. But you know, one of the organisations, if I may share one, is the Osmani Trust in Tower Hamlets. They work with people from all communities, but given the community it's in, Bangladeshi and Somalian community. They work with people, some of the mentors are people with lived experiences, with their support with education, accommodation, mentoring, and we've seen huge successes in that. We've got an organisation, I think it's Haringey, it's called ARC. They've provided actually housing stock to help some of the people, and if you look at the data, it's predominantly young black men into being, coming out of prison, into housing, and then positive moved on. I could go on because we're working with the Irish chaplaincy, because actually some things that often isn't mentioned is Gypsy Roman travellers are overrepresented in prisons. Working with an organisation to work with our ex-armed service personnel, because again, they're a hard-to-reach group. I could go on. Transgender, people who are in prison, who are going through transition, reaching out to groups from those communities. So we are building this, but I would say it's been 12 months in the making, and we're on a better footing now, and I hope to see that develop.
Thank you. Katie, did you want to add anything on that question?
Yeah, thank you. And Kilvinder, I think, has given a really good picture of how the probation service now can do some of that work and can reach out and make more partnerships, and it's really heartening to see the destruction of those relationships in 2014 was one of the things that really set the probation service and the probation system back, I think. But I just wanted to pick up on the specific point about people from Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds. We've done some work, NAPO have led some work around race. And we partnered with HMPPS in doing a race survey, looking at both the experiences of staff and people on probation. And there is an action plan, and it has taken a long time to get there. However, it just highlights how much work there is to do. The probation service is now a very large organisation and very complex, and has multiple layers of hierarchy that didn't exist before. And I think leadership on issues around race has been lacking. I think that is changing now. There is a renewed focus on race and on the experiences of both staff and people on probation of the system, but there is clearly a lot of work to do, and the action plan is ambitious, but is vitally needed, because unless we have a staff group who feel confident that they will be treated with dignity and respect, then that we won't have a staff group who are able to work confidently with people on probation in that way. And one of the things that is part of probation values is that inquisitive and questioning approach. So when you go through probation training, you are taught to question everything, to question the system in which you're working, to see the person on probation in front of you who you're working with in the context of the system. That actually has become very difficult to do when you're part of the civil service, and you are constrained in the way you're able to work with people on probation. However, I think we are getting back towards that. We are able now to say, actually, there's some work we need to do on our organisation. We need to get better at this. There are things we need to improve if we are to offer that specific, specialised service to people who have been disadvantaged often throughout their journey through the criminal justice system because of their background. And so we absolutely, there is work to do, but I'm really pleased that we've got now the race action plan is in place. HMPPS are completely committed to it, and at NAPO ourselves are running race roadshows with members across England and Wales, and that has also been really positive, but still a lot more work to do, and providing specialised commissioned services is only one part of it. We also need to make sure that every person who works in the probation service understands the context in which they're working, understands the system, and understands the disadvantage that many people experience right the way through criminal justice system.
That's very reassuring to hear. We heard at our last meeting from the head of policy at Action for Race Equality that there's little evidence that probation staff even discuss ethnicity, culture, religion, and experience of discrimination, and how sometimes this drives their offending at all. So it's reassuring to hear that that you acknowledge how much there is to do, and B, that is a piece of work that needs to be done. So thank you very much, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I know Kilvinder wants to come in very briefly on the back of that.
Yeah, the point I want to make, I'll be quick. I am a woman of colour. I have faced racism, and therefore, as the Mayor once said to me, we've got skin in the game here. I'm really pleased to say that 11 out of my 18 heads of service are from Black and Asian communities, which is completely different from any other region in the country. 3 out of the 12 regional probation directors are from Black and Asian communities. Over 50% of my staff are from Black Asian communities. It's important that we do focus on the cultural elements of this, because that's one of the issues that I'm dealing with in London. After Black Lives Matters, I commissioned an organisation called Equality Works to work with my leadership team and my management team around the cultural competence issue. And I know people talk about race, but when you've got multiracial teams, there's actually challenges around the cultural elements of that. And then just recently, we've completed a whole round of management training in relation to equality as well. And I have put a business case into the centre that they've agreed that I can have an equalities team to be able to build on this work. So I just wanted to show some positives we're doing in London.
Lovely, thank you very much. Going over now to Assembly Member Pigeon.
Lovely, thank you. It's been very interesting hearing from you all this morning, and I have to say, Kilvinder, I don't envy you with the task in hand. It's huge, bringing these organisations together and turning around the service, and I can see where you want to get to, but there's a lot of steps in between. Can we just clarify the issues around staff? Can you not hear me? Sorry. The issues around staffing, because you talked about you inherited a vacancy rate of 600. Our briefing talks about 283 vacancies as of 31st of March. Clearly there are different roles here, the probation officers and admin and so on. And we heard from Katie, leave rates are much higher in London. And you said something earlier about acknowledged staff of now 2,800, I thought I heard you say, whereas I think you currently employ 2,294. So are you able to set out, or if not, put in writing to us to really understand how many officers and staff you have now, where you want to get to by when, the sort of grades of them, and also how you compare to other bits of the country, because we're hearing that staff are leaving. How does it compare in London compared to other bits of the country? Yeah.
If I give you some quick principles, but I'll happy follow up in writing for the detail.
Might be helpful, thank you.
I think it's not just London. I think you could talk about London, the home counties. So my colleagues in Thames Valley, around East of England, Kent, Surrey and Sussex are also struggling because of the different opportunities that are out there. In relation to the staffing levels, so the target staffing has increased because there's an acknowledgement that we need more people to do the job in hand. If you break that down, and this is approximate, so yes. It's about 150 probation officers, but we do have agency staff that offset about half of that, but we want permanent staff. It's just under 300 probation service officers. That's the big one for me, that we need to do that mass recruitment. And then in terms of case administrators, it's about 150. Within that probation service officer group, that's people who will do the prison resettlement work, because like I said, there was an exodus after unification. So we're going to need, again, just under 100 probably to do that work. That might not be a perfect number that I've given you. We need people in our victims unit as well. So you break that probation service officer role down into different departments, and probably about 150 of them delivering sentence management. We also want to recruit lots of unpaid work supervisors. We've got a backlog of unpaid work community payback, a fantastic department that we have that are doing lots of work in the community, but we need to recruit more supervisors.
Okay, that's really helpful, and if we could get that greater detail, would be helpful. But have you currently got, with the numbers you've got, enough staff to deliver an effective service in London?
We're doing what's called prioritising probation at the moment, which is, in essence, a bit like accident emergency triaging. Yeah. We're putting resources following risk. We have to think about our high-risk cases, our complex cases. One of the initiatives we're looking at in Croydon is with the CFO. Please don't ask me what that stands for now. I've forgotten. But it's a hub system for working with people who finding it hard to get employment. So our probation staff are looking to base themselves there with that for our lower risk cases, so that we can have a hub system where there's other people there that we can work much more in a collaborative approach. So we're looking at innovative ways of doing things differently for those low risk cases. Sometimes I think people forget that more of our cases are community cases and not people from prison. So we're looking at a different way of working with those big numbers of low-risk people so that they do have some intervention, but they don't have the intervention that's required for those more complex cases.
Okay, so you're managing, you're going to be recruiting and so on. There's been a national drive, I believe, MOG announced in 2021, trying to get 1,000 more probation officers nationally. Has that benefited your service, and what other things are you doing to try to retain your officers?
On the first part, probation officers, we've got a very, very healthy pipeline and a real diverse pipeline. We're getting more men in, we're getting more older people in. We've always been strong with a mix of ethnic group. The retention is a lot harder. I can't deny that, because it is London and there are more opportunities. We've trained people who've gone off to be police officers. We've trained we've trained people who've gone off to work in the Ministry of Justice or our different departments within the. So that is a tough one. It becomes a vicious circle. If we get those 600 people in situ, the work will get easier because everybody's workloads will be distributed fairly. But it's trying to hold people. And the message I give is do the best you can in the current circumstances. And, you know, we want to get the people in so that people's lives will be easier and they'll want to stay, because actually it's a vocationally led organisation.
Yeah. Exactly. I think you've answered quite a lot of my questions. The final one is around your agency staff, because you're spending more than double any other probation region. 367,000 on agency staff, I think, in the last year. How do you ensure that those officers have the necessary training and qualifications before they take up the post?
A lot of the agency staff are not probation officers, they're administrators. Right. A significant number, which goes back to the service centre vicious circle. In terms of the practitioners, the probation officers or probation service officers, they also have to complete the mandatory training. One of the things in terms of the groundwork we did after unification was setting some standards about mandatory training in terms of for CRC colleagues and National Probation Service colleagues, because ultimately National Probation Service colleagues needed to do some retraining around working with complex substance misuse workers, people on probation who had gone to the CRC. And so having set that safeguarding training, the trauma-based approach training, domestic abuse training, we're making sure that every member of staff is doing that, including the agency practitioners.
Great, lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And very briefly, Assembly Member Ahmed wants to come in with a question.
Thank you very much, Chair. Kilvinder, I'm really pleased, with what you were saying and the efforts that you clearly have made. I've got a couple of questions on your previous answer. You said, and forgive me, I might have got this wrong, but I was trying to scribble down all the good news. You talked about 50% of your officers now being from a Black, Asian and minority ethnic community. You also talked about recognising cultural issues in terms of that recruitment. Could you unpick that a little bit for us so that we understand what the issues are and the difficulties are? And secondly, within that 50%, how many are now within the higher levels of decision making within the hierarchy? And I suspect that might have something to do with retention.
Thank you. If I pick up the cultural issues first, I think the issue is people talk about Black, Asian, minority ethnic groups as one homogenous group, and they're not. So within that, you could have people, for example, I've got colleagues from North Africa, or I've got people from Jamaica, I've got people from Pakistan, I've got people from India, and we know the geopolitics around that, so that can get played out in communities. So it's really, really important that the whole issue of respect and respecting people's religions, respecting the people's way of life, and that's the cultural differences. So sometimes you get tensions because it isn't a homogenous group. We don't all think the same just because of the pigment. And actually having those deeper, meaningful conversations is why we brought in Equalities Working, to start to unpick that, because some of our white managers really struggled to deal with that. So enabling them to have those conversations. Just over 30% of the middle management group are from Black, Asian, minority ethnic groups. As I said, 11 out of my 18 heads of service, so they're the ones who lead on the probation delivery units delivering the service, 11 of them are from Black and Asian minority ethnic groups. So already you can see big numbers that I'm really proud of, I have to say. But challenges come with them, so it's really important that I get them the mentors and the support they have. There was another question, and I've forgotten what that was.
No, it was that. And thank you so much for explaining that. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We're now going on to prison leavers and resettlement, and the questions are going to be started by Assembly Member Rogers, who's online.
Thank you, Chair. Again, this is my questions initially directed at Kilvinder. At the committee's previous meeting on probation, the committee heard that over 60% of women leaving HMP Bronzefield don't have appropriate accommodation on release. And it doesn't just seem to be a problem confined to women. 2019, 2020, 12,000 people left prison homeless. So why are so many people leaving prison without suitable accommodation? What are you doing to address this? And where do projects like, I think it's CAS 3 fit in? So that's for Kilvinder, please.
Okay, I'll try and break this down. I think one of the issues is, as a probation service, we don't hold stock. We can offer advice and support. This is a community issue, and we work very closely with local authorities in relation to homelessness issues. In relation to, be it women or men coming out of prison homeless, the CAS 3, the Community Accommodation Service, is we are working in 5 lots across London to ensure that from autumn onwards, that nobody will be released from prison homeless. They will have somewhere to stay, and I can't remember the exact number, I think for 30 days, whilst we work with them to move them on. So that's another good news story. I mean, there's lots of good news stories, but it's what we're trying to do is resolve issues that have been around for too long. One of the things that came out of COVID, and lots of bad things, but one of the positive unforeseen consequences is the work we did with local authorities and private sector to get all our homeless people on probation into accommodation, and it demonstrated what we could do. That developed into the homeless prevention team working with the police in relation to managing the risk, with the local authorities and others supporting us in that. That's developed into that community accommodation service and that opportunity to learn from what happened in COVID. So in terms of what's happened in the past, people being released homeless, I think it's a wider community issue about why people go into prisons, how can people lose their accommodation, these short-term sentences, people are complex. One of our day one services that we commissioned was with St Mungus and the Single Homelessness Project to support people in that pre-release work. And again, because we don't have stock, we don't have anywhere to move people in. It's about advice and support, working with the local authority. But the CAS 3 is the positive news story in this.
Thank you. So if I'm hearing you correctly, from autumn, when you'll be providing everyone with, or you'll be making sure that everyone has at least 30 days of accommodation, does that mean that no one is going to be leaving prison homeless at that point? Certainly in London.
I'm certainly not guaranteeing a 100% success rate in anything. I've been around too long for that. The goal is that, the ambition is that we're at the moment of putting the infrastructure in place and the commissioning in place to move to that goal. So whether it be autumn or soon after that or even before that, we've got to go through that commercial process. One of the issues we do have, that revolving door about people, and I've seen this because I've monitored the issue about women coming out of Bronzefield and the numbers coming in and out. I've personally monitored them. And one of the issues was unification and how Bronzefield actually located in Kent, Surrey and Sussex and not London, but they've got London people. So I've worked really closely with my colleague in Kent, Surrey and Sussex to make sure that we bridge that gap in terms of resources, and I've paid more from the London budget to support Bronzefield. Sometimes the issue is appointments are made at local authorities and people don't attend their appointments because they're complex. They've got huge issues. So even, you know, the whole thing about taking a horse to water and getting it to feed, we're working with very complex individuals. But our goal, our ambition, is to make sure that we can support everybody in accommodation, substance misuse, mental health, etc.
Thank you. Why would you say it's so difficult for prisons and probation services to ensure that everyone leaving prison has the basics they need to function, such as bank accounts, ID, and access to healthcare, as well as accommodation? And where do resettlement passports sit in as a potential solution to these problems?
Okay, you're asking me a lot of detail here, so I know some of the general principles. There's a lot of work being done on the resettlement passports with prisons. There's some pilot areas going. I know we're working locally to make sure that people have ID before they leave prison. If they have ID, they have access to things. We're doing a lot of work around continuity of care, the I've forgotten, the criminal justice health framework has changed, and we're around that table. I don't know if Will be able to help me correct some of that, but we're employing social and health and justice coordinators to make sure that we do that continuity of care. So if somebody is in a prison, be it substance misuse issue, mental health issue, that continuity of care carries on when they're in the community. It's been fragmented because the different commissioning models. So some people commission the service in the prison, you commission another service in the community. We need one commissioning framework. So it's a seamless transition. So again, a lot of work being done on continuity of care. We're kind of at the start or at the middle of lots of exciting pieces of work being done. And we just need to keep that momentum and keep our staff and keep people having the hope that we will get there.
And that sounds like it involves a lot of working with partners. Is that the case?
Absolutely. I think on a monthly basis, I meet with the directors from health. I meet regularly with MOPAC. I meet with Louisa Rolfe from the Metropolitan Police. I meet with all my heads of service. They meet with their local authority, community safety partners. I'm sorry, I'm getting tired a bit now. Community safety partnerships. So I think one of the things I would say about probation, and I've been in probation for 28 years, is we are partners in everything. We are the glue that sometimes bring partners together. And that's what I've always loved in the work of probation. It is a collaborative partnership world. We cannot do anything on our own. We mustn't work in silos. So I'm going back to unification. The exciting bit is we can all come back together and do this.
Excellent, thank you. And my last question to you, you'll be pleased to hear. How effective has your work been in supporting prison leavers into education, training and employment? And what have been some of the main challenges you've faced in those areas?
So one of our day one services is Maximus. There are employment training and education providers. So again, it's about linking in that pre-release work. So 6 months or about that time of people coming out, being linked in with that provider. I think the challenges has been losing a lot of the resettlement staff on unification, so that we've suddenly got this huge gap in our resources, so we need to plug that. One of the things we need to be smarter at is that co-commissioning with our prison colleagues. So instead of paying twice for employment training and education, that we're paying once, so that is seamless again from anything that people have done in the prison regarding education, employment, apprenticeships, that it's seamless, that they can carry on doing that same thing when they come out.
Thank you very much. I've got a question now, I think, for Will. Will, good morning. The Mayor funded the transformation of the prison escape restaurants at Wormwood Scrubs, providing training and employment opportunities for prisoners to sort of enter the catering industry after they left prison. Are you able to tell us a bit about that programme and what percentage of the people who actually participated did in fact go on to find employment in that sector?
Sincere apologies. I think that programme may predate my tenure at MOPAC,
okay.
And obviously it's not something that's currently live in our portfolio. It's something that sort of happened and lives in the prison service. So I'm happy to find out that information and come right to the committee.
That'd be fine. Thank you. That's all my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and you are getting a bit of a break now, Kilvinder. I'll be pleased to tell you. Do have a drink of water. We're now going over to Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you, Chair. Very kind. This question is for MOPAC as well. What are you doing to improve how agencies across London work better to support people on release, and how are you monitoring that performance?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as Kilvinder mentioned, supporting people on release is definitely a partnership activity. I think we've heard already some of the challenges that people face in terms of accommodation, ETE. We've already discussed those. I think where MOPAC, what MOPAC seeks to do is, with the strong convening role the Deputy Mayor has and the Mayor, is we seek to bring the criminal justice system together to try and look at these issues end to end. And this particularly happens at the Mayor's London Crime Reduction Board, and the Deputy Mayor is now chairing the London Criminal Justice Board. So again, we're trying to look at these things holistically. Specifically in terms of prisons, we're very pleased that we're currently in the process of commissioning some additional support. So you may recall Prison Pathfinder, which was a pilot programme which is just coming to an end, that looks specifically at violence interventions in prison, with an aim to ensure that on release people are better able to not reoffend. We're working really, because it's really great to see, by the way, that Kilvinder and her opposite number in prisons, Ian Vigurs, who's the London Prison Director, have a joint plan this year, which will be coming out shortly. I think that was the sort of one weakness of reunification, actually, is in the target operating model. We didn't talk too much about that. So really pleased to see that. And what MOPAC's doing to support that is we're doing some additional commissioning. So we'll be supporting something that will work on both sides of the gate. So there'll be continuity in that intervention either side. We're also, with some additional funding from the Mayor, employing a specific worker who'll be able to work much more with the partnership, take some of the pressure off probation and prisons themselves. And they'll be looking at, again, forging much better links on release with the rest of the criminal justice system and the rest of the community. So those are just a couple of examples. I don't know if there's anything particular more.
And how are you monitoring the performance? How are you monitoring the performance? Are you monitoring the performance?
So most of the sort of metrics around prison release, I mean, I presume you're talking about sort of reoffending and other things of that nature, are predominantly national statistics. So what MOPAC tends to do is to focus on areas that are particularly important to the Mayor's Police and Crime Plan. So, for example, we're just starting a deep dive looking particularly at high harm offenders, working alongside Met colleagues and probation colleagues and others to try and get a holistic picture of that type of offender management. In terms of sort of the overall global statistics, there's always quite a big lag on reoffending because obviously it takes a bit of time to work that out. So we do look at those statistics, and we look at them at the new London Crime Reduction, the LCJB, the London Criminal Justice Board, which was previously chaired by Assistant Commissioner Rolfe and is now chaired by the DMPC. That's the sort of engine room, if you like, of the criminal justice system in London.
Okay, so do you have specific KPIs? Have you set yourself any targets at all?
So obviously MOPAC's KPIs, as it were, will be the delivery of things in the police and crime plan. You know, unlike policing, we don't have a sort of statutory oversight role of either the probation or the police. Police we do. Apologies, Nick. Of probation or prisons or the criminal justice system. It's something actually that the Mayor has called for. Something that would be incredibly useful actually is with the police we have something called a Section 36 agreement, which means we can ask for data and the Met sort of have to give it to us. That would be incredibly useful, I think, for all PCCs to have. It'd be a way that we could get data from prisons, probation, we could put it together in a way that would allow us to get a joined-up picture of the criminal justice system. You know, at the moment, each individual agency will have their own stats from Whitehall. It does make it a challenge.
Well, that might be a good recommendation, Chair. Okay, so moving on. I believe the Mayor's due to publish a women's prison release protocol. Do you know when that's happening?
Yeah, absolutely. So the protocol is a much-needed framework. What it seeks to do is decrease, as we've already talked about, the number of women released from prison without fixed abode to a safe and secure home. What I would say is it's really ambitious, the protocol. So the Mayor and us, we're based on sort of what I'd call the best and sort of really the best practice we could find. And that's been predominantly Bronzefield and Lambeth. And I know you would have heard, I saw the minutes and watched a bit of the last committee. I know you've heard a bit more about that. What's really important is the implementation of that protocol needs key partners. So it needs London councils, the umbrella body, as well as the individual local boroughs. It also needs the G15 housing associations. So clearly they are crucial to the piece. We're actually getting really good engagement with the G15 at the moment. in a number of other areas such as domestic abuse accommodation. So I'm really pleased with the way that partnership's coming together, and also obviously probation. Understandably, it is an ambitious protocol, so those partners just want a bit more time before they can become a co-signatory. But without them, we really want them to become a co-signatory. So I can't give you an exact time, but I can perhaps write to you with an update.
Yeah. Would you have a best guess then?
It's not going to take a long time. I'd really hope by the end of the year. We're currently recommissioning our. That's my hope, though. Please don't hold me to that, because it relies on partners satisfying themselves about delivery, which is clearly important. As Kilvinder mentioned earlier, we're recommissioning we're one of the only 2 places in the country to have this sort of co-commissioning agreement with probation. We're really proud of it, and ours is around female offending. So it'd be great to have this in place as that new female offending co-commissioning service comes online, partially because, in terms of preventing homelessness, as Kilvinder mentioned, it's that wraparound support, that holistic look, as well as help with practical issues like ID, that's going to, I think, make the biggest difference.
Okay. Right, finally, has the Mayor's Office worked with London Prisons and Probation to review the effectiveness of duty to refer in helping to meet the housing needs of women leaving prison, as recommended by the Safe Homes for Women Leaving Prison?
I'm unsure about that specific duty. I don't know, Kilvinder, if you know.
So I think, forgive me, I've forgotten his name from the MOPAC office, chairs the Pan-London Rough Sleepers steering group, which I'm a member of, which the subgroup is looking at issues like that to make sure the whole duty to refer is happening across the piece. So it's a different department than yours, I think.
Right.
Thanks, Kilvinder.
You're off the hook there then, Will.
Well, I take a global view of the CJS.
Fine. Okay, I'll leave it there. Chair, thank you.
Thank you very much. Going now over to Assembly Member Sahota.
Thank you, Chair. This is a question for you, Kilvinder. When this committee last looked at probation, the London Community Rehabilitation Company said that they couldn't secure even temporary accommodation for 27% of those who are leaving the prison service. Has the situation improved in London in finding accommodation for people leaving the prison service?
I don't have the statistics to back this, but I think that recognising it is a problem is why we're moving to the community accommodation service. So the work we're doing at the moment is to ensure that that number is reduced dramatically.
Has it reduced? How are you collaborating with the London Council to reduce that figure?
So we're part of the Pan-London Rough Sleepers board. That's the first time we've worked Pan-London with the local authorities, with health services, with MOPAC and ourselves. So we work closely with London Council. As I was saying, during COVID, we came together with the local authorities and others to make sure that we worked to get rough sleepers off the streets. So there was a significant drop in homelessness then, and it's continuing that work. I don't know the numbers right here, right now, and I can get them to you.
Can you get the number back to the committee, please?
Yeah.
That'd be very helpful to see if you've made any progress since 2017.
And the biggest number we need to really look at is from when CAS 3, because that's the actual commissioning of a service to support us in reducing that number.
Okay. And are people on probation getting the support they need in terms of mental health care?
I think that's a tough one because in terms of mental health care, clearly that's the domain of the health services. I think sometimes there's a confusion in relation to vulnerable adults and learning disabilities. So we need to work closer with the local authorities, safeguarding adults departments for that. And I think, so then we have to look at the mental health services, which is about diagnosis for mental health. So I think sometimes those two completely different things get merged into one. I think we need to do more work with people with neurodiversity, learning disabilities.
For the prisoner leaving, the prison service, right? It doesn't really matter whether it's mental health service, whether it's probation service. What they want is access to the service, right?
Yeah.
And I'm just concerned that 52% of people leaving the prison service have a mental health problem. 52%. That's a huge number.
Yeah.
And 22% saying that they're having difficulty seeing a mental health worker. Now, it's no consolation to them, right, to say it's the NHS or what, but the question is how are we helping them to access the service they need?
So the point I'm trying to make badly, I'm sorry about that, is the commissioning of that service doesn't sit in the probation service. Mm-hmm. We have to refer and access services from the mental health or from the local authorities. They're the providers of that service, so we help them by providing our needs assessments and the details we have to say, this is the service we require of you to commission. So one of the things we have been able to do for our Day 2 services is we are working with an organisation called Forward, but that's in relation to dependency. We're also looking at how we can support people with that low-level mental health issues, so that's something we can commission in-house. But it's a wider community conversation about services available to the community, whether it be mental health or whether it be in relation to neurodiversity. So the probation service isn't set up to provide that service. We have to refer into that service as well.
And when you refer to the service, what happens? What's the outcomes?
It's variable across, it's a patchwork across London. It will depend on local commissioning of those services.
Okay. And there's this simpler referral pathway for individuals with multiple needs, right? And that is promised to reducing reoffending plan by 2022. Have we delivered that plan yet?
Would you repeat that? I'm
Yes.
sorry. I should say I've got a hearing difficulty, so if you could just slow that down, please.
Yeah. Simpler referral pathway for individuals with multiple needs promised in your reducing reoffending plan by April 22. Has that plan been delivered?
No, not yet.
Why not?
Because we need to commission the services first to be able to refer them into it. So I think we need to work on it.
When do you think we will deliver it? I mean, your target date was April 22. We're now in July 22. When do you think we'll deliver this?
I'll have to come back on to you on that.
Okay. That'd be very helpful. Thank you.
You need partners to help.
I know, that's what
I mean, may I just come in for a second? I mean, I think what Kilvinder's, trying to explain here is, we can't, there is, at the moment, we know there are significant mental health waiting lists for everybody in the community, regardless of whether they're offenders or they're in, our org services or from elsewhere. And it's presenting a real challenge. I mean, something we're trying to do at MOPAC to try and help is obviously we're doing a lot of convening in this space, but specifically for the sort of female offending, we're thinking about, we're as part of the new service, we're thinking we're going to have a dedicated health advocate who can work on both sides of the gate. That may help, as ever with MOPAC services. They're not core probation services. They're areas where we think we can, help that also contribute to the police and crime plan. But I think those health advocates may help. They're being co-commissioned by the NHS. That might be a model that might help. Also for the IOM cohort, 45% of those, as you say, have mental health needs. So actually with some mayoral money, this really is in the NHS and local authorities give to commission, but we are going to do a little bit of commissioning on a neurodiversity service and a dedicated mental health service, which should both launch next year. So we're trying to, develop an evidence base. We're trying to pilot things that might help.
And have the neurodivergent people, a lot of prisoners have neurodivergent conditions. How are we catering for, this is leaving aside the mental health services, right? How are we catering for them?
And I think that's the point around what the local authority are doing around commissioning that, because the probation service, we don't have stock for housing, we don't have nurses, we don't have mental health services. We refer to those community providers, so we're around the table. So you make a good point. We provide the needs, we talk about the needs of our prisoners, and we go around the table to advocate for that. And you raise a really, really important issue. But some of the people who are more influential in that are not around this table.
I'm a working GP and I see these patients and I'm concerned about it. These patients, these people need services. And I think we need to be responding to those needs, right? Saying it's the NHS or it's X or it's Y isn't good enough for those people who are suffering these conditions, right? Is the point I'm trying to make, right? Okay, and I think we need to raise that voice, right? That we might recognize the needs, right, but the system is somehow failing them, and that's what I'm trying to make point of. Can I have a view from the National Probation Service on this, please, or what they think about this?
Katie, have you got a short comment you'd like to make on that?
Yeah, thank you. I think there's two things. One is the provision of the services, the treatment services that people require, and I absolutely agree with Will and Kilvinder that there is not enough access to services for people in the community, whatever group they belong to, and what we see is increasing restriction on services to those at the highest levels of need, which means that you can't get intervention at the lower levels of need, and inevitably leads to escalation. But the other side of it is how we work as practitioners with people who have different needs, how we work with people who are neurodivergent, how we work with people who have other mental health issues, and a little bit ago we talked about training that was offered for people in the probation service, and there's very little training for staff in the probation service around making the support you're offering, making the supervision that is required of you accessible to people, whatever their needs. And for me, that's a really key thing that is lacking. We often talk about hard to engage groups, and we shouldn't talk about hard to engage groups. We should talk about groups who need our service to be delivered differently. And we should deliver our service differently in order to engage them, not describe them as the problem. And there's huge gaps in training and development for probation staff, especially around how to do this. As I say, most of the learning and development on offer once you've qualified as a probation officer is basic mandatory process-based training. It's online learning. It's quite kind of routine. And it's just about making sure that you can tick the boxes and you've had some input on the basics. There is nothing about how to deliver the service you're being expected to deliver in a way that meets the needs of people who might have very, very complex needs.
Thank you. Thank you to all the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Devenish.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning. I was going to ask about both mental health and homelessness, but I think they've both been covered. But I do want to make one point, and I don't mean in any way to be disrespectful to anybody, but having listened to the previous meeting for 3 hours and listened to this meeting, I'm not sure I'm able to do my role of scrutiny. So I'm not sure we're being given the evidence or any real metrics to make any case. And I don't really understand at the end of this meeting, if somebody asked me what I'd learned, or if somebody asked me, well, is the probation service in dire trouble, like the Met Police in special measures, for example, I wouldn't know the answer to that. I don't know if you're doing a good job, a bad job, or somewhere in the middle. And I'm really struggling with the metrics. And when people say, well, X is in charge of that, and they can't remember X's name, and it's another co-located cross-government organisation.
Assembly Member Devenish, do you have a question? Because actually, yes, I feel very informed from these meetings. I'm exceptionally grateful to the guests that we've had.
Well, thank you.
And whilst there are other questions to be asked, I think all of us are hugely grateful to the people that we've had.
Thank you, Chair. Well, you're entitled to your opinion.
I am, Assembly Devenish. I think we'll move on to a question now.
Can I just ask a question?
Well, please do ask a question then.
My question is there a simple to understand dashboard or set of KPIs that are clear, that when we have this meeting again, no doubt in a year's time, we'll be to look at that, what you provided today and what you provided in a year's time, so we can understand where we are going?
Can you? Thank
yeah,
you.
I can. There are a number of metrics, service level agreements. The work of the probation service is multifaceted. So there's metrics around pre-sentence reports, whether that be concordance, whether that be quality. There are metrics around sentence management. Again, some of those are much more about timeliness of things being done. There's the reconviction rates, which are clearly the more longitudinal impact of rehabilitation. There's rates around recalls. There's work that we've done for pre-release. There's parole reports. There's the work we do with victims. So we have victim satisfaction. We also have, again, timeliness issues, service level agreements for that. We've probably got a huge raft of a dashboard that we could provide you with. Most of it looks at timeliness, and then we do our own internal audits. When I say internal, it's not us making our own homework, it's HMPPS's auditors come and look at it. So we have a huge raft of people who are in accommodation, people who are in employment, people who are doing programmes, people who complete unpaid work. So I can provide you with a huge raft of data. I wasn't asked to provide any today, so apologies if you wanted any.
No, that's fine. That's lovely if you could provide us with some, because we do find it interesting. Thank you so much. We're running short of time on this, but I'm now going to Assembly Member Ahmed.
Thank you, Chair. And can I echo your gratitude and thanks for the information that our panel has provided to us today. I've personally found it incredibly informative. I think it's well documented that there have been massive cuts to the criminal justice system since 2010. The police, with the number of officers, the 20,000 officers, 21,000 officers, the police staff, the court service, the prison service, the Crown Prosecution Service that's had to have 33% of cuts, and the prison service and the probation service since 2003 to 2019 has had a budget fall of 40% nationally. And despite the COVID uplift, the probation service still has had a 15% cut in real terms since 2010. My question, and with the background and knowledge that you have all explained over the last two sessions about how hard you've had to work within those, within that very difficult situation, is has there been a large cohort of offenders since 2010 who have been let down by these resource issues within the probation service? And I wonder if I could start with Katie, please.
Thank you. It's a really interesting question. I think that the budget cuts, the resource cuts, have compounded the harm done by transforming rehabilitation, which broke up a system which worked perfectly well. And at the time of transforming rehabilitation, when that happened in 2014, all of the probation trusts were measured as performing to a good or outstanding level. None of them required improvement. So I think that in that context, you can weather some budget cuts. You can, if you're performing well and you're starting from that position, you can adjust the way you deliver a service and weather it. And we had a history of doing that in probation. I've been in probation since 2005, and certainly we saw cuts in the mid-2000s to the late 2000s that we were able to weather because probation trusts were able to adjust the way that they delivered their services and continue delivering them. What happened in 2014 was that layered on top of budget cuts was the breakup of a system that worked well. So you had the separation into the National Probation Service and the CRCs, both of which were set up without enough of the right staff. And I want to be really clear about that. The way that the probation trusts were broken up and separated meant that there weren't the right staff in either organisation, and that led to some of the CRCs reducing their staffing numbers over the life of their contracts, but it also led to a problem for both organisations in terms of recruitment. So even though budgets were being cut, if they hadn't been cut, we wouldn't have been able to recruit anyway. And pay has been suppressed for probation staff for over a decade. We've only had one cost of living rise in pay in 12 years in probation. So all of those things together, the budget cuts, the breakup of the service, the suppression of pay, have combined to mean that, yes, I absolutely agree, there are a cohort of people who deserved a better level of service from probation and weren't able to get it because the resources weren't there and because of the political decisions around how the probation services are delivered. And we see that continuing. We've had just in the last fortnight an instruction that probation officers may no longer make recommendations in parole reports or at oral hearings. So professional probation officers are being told they are not allowed to make a recommendation to the parole board. And things like that, political decisions like that, have a huge impact on probation officer morale, on their practice, on their sense of professional identity, on their confidence to do their job. So I absolutely agree, but it's not for want of trying, because there are individual probation officers and probation service officers, case administrators, senior managers like Kilvinder, who go into work day after day after day and fight against this to try and deliver a decent level of service. But when the system is against you, you have very little chance of success, frankly. And I know how hard Kilvinder is working in London to try and set up the organisation to be able to deliver services. But when staff are working at 150+% of their measured capacity, they're not going to be doing everything they need to do. It's just not possible. 150% of your measured capacity means you're working 9.5 days of work in a 5-day week, and it's not feasible to do everything you need to do. And I do believe that there are people who have suffered from poor service since. It's really positive that we're getting back to the probation service being able to commission and partnership specific services, but we have to note that a lot of those specific specialised services have been absent or very much limited in the system during the period of transforming rehabilitation, and many of those partnerships existed before TR. So there is a huge piece of work to do to repair probation, and it needs investment in order to do it. And I'm not clear that that investment is going to be forthcoming, because I don't think that that there will be investment in all of the elements that are needed, including pay issues, so that, you know, in areas like London, Kilvinder can retain more of the staff that she employs and trains.
Katie, thank you so much. That was very informative. Before I finish, Check, I wonder if I could just ask Commander John if he'd like to respond on that, because there is an element of joined up services to my question as well.
With regards to specifically the elements that we just heard from Katie on, or
no, I asked about given the resource implications since 2010 and the budget cuts across the whole of the criminal justice system. Do you believe that there has been a cohort of offenders who have not benefited from the services of the probation service?
I think that's apologies for not being given a really straight answer, but I think it's a very difficult question to answer on the basis that, yes, theoretically there are capacity issues across the various different partnership arrangements, and we work with probation very closely across a significant number of different offenders, high risk and very high, medium and low. What I can say is I don't have any evidence to provide where that's the case. I can provide evidence to the contrary of that around the processes that are undertaken, the effective partnership working. I know we'll come on to perhaps some of that when we talk about integrated offender management, MAPA and MARAC processes. But I go back to my earlier point, if I may, is that clearly since reunification, we have seen an increase in the working relationship, but there will always be pockets of capacity issues, which we've heard about several times around the numbers of vacancies that probation or London Probation Service currently hold.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Lovely. Well, we're coming on to the next section now, which is partnership working to reduce offending. And earlier, Kilvinder, you were praising partnership working, and I can absolutely do that. When I was leader of Harrow Council, we got things done because we worked in partnership, and probation was certainly part of that. So thank you. I'm going to start asking Will a question to start with. When will the final evaluations of the knife crime and domestic violence GBS tagging pilots be published? And are there any early indications of their impact?
Thanks. Well, yes, there are. We've tagged almost, I think, 1,100 through that scheme, and there was a recent, actually, HMI probation inspection report into electronic monitoring. Although the MOPAC, as it's called, electronic monitoring wasn't included, we got our own sort of special section at the end that was pretty effusive, actually, about the different operating model we use here, the different technology, the ease at which probation staff can, we've got a dedicated person, the information that goes back to the police, our ability to use the GPS, so it's all very highly praised. In terms of the specific evaluations, as you'll know, the Deputy Mayor is very keen that our evaluations are really robust. So on the DA tagging pilot, so that started in March 21 as a scheme, so that will be, we're expecting the initial evaluation to be completed by the end of the summer, and we aim to publish that before Christmas. The knife crime pilot, which started in 2019, on the MOPAC website you'll be able to find the interim report, which was published in 2020. The final process and performance report for the knife crime pilot, which will include reoffending data, obviously for an obvious reason, the reoffending data takes a little bit of time, is going to be published this year. It was due to be in the spring. We just had a little issue with some control group data, because obviously we need to compare our cohort against the control group, which has caused a little delay, but this has now been resolved. So again, we'll probably publish that. It will be available for obviously our internal review and our clearance processes by the end of the summer. So again, we should publish that before Christmas, probably November.
Would you factor into that the fact that if an offender was a thief, as an example, will you put any factoring in that perhaps if they've reoffended but not got caught? Or does that not?
So that's tricky. I suppose that's a slightly tricky one to answer. So obviously for the MOPAC tagging, it's going to be the domestic abuse or knife crime.
Yeah.
So if acquisitive crime, they'd be potentially on a different tag, maybe one of the Home Office schemes. So ours obviously looking at those two offence types only. If they reoffended and their offence was acquisitive, then yes, that would be part of their reoffending. So we would pick that up. Any offence would be a reoffence.
Okay, thank you. And now to Commander John. Do the tagging pilots provide you with the information you need to monitor high risk of harm individuals and intervene to prevent violence when necessary?
So as Will's touched on, we have a really effective working relationship across the various electronic monitoring pilots. I have a dedicated lead responsible officer who monitors and deals with this. We get a number of breakdown of the breaches on a regular basis. I think it's weekly, whereby we can obviously review those and then where appropriate action those out. As Will's touched on, obviously since March 2021. I can give you some figures if you require. We had 141 high-risk offenders FDA released, and working and managing those in partnership with probation. We saw 54 of those have been breached. And they were actioned because the information that was provided, we were able to action those in partnership. We obviously know that, as Will's touched on, that pilot is being evaluated as we speak. And obviously we'll look forward to reviewing those results. As far as I think, Chair, you touched on the acquisitive crime elements as well. Obviously that's another acquisitive crime electronic monitoring programme we have in place. That's been live since September of 2021. And that is ongoing. That's part of a national pilot. So obviously, again, when we get the information that comes through, we'll review that. It won't always be actioned because it depends on the type of information that's being provided. But I can say that we do have a really good flow of information into the MPS and into our tagging leads so that we can monitor that and then task out into the local officers and the local units.
Good, because it can only but help, can't it? I mean,
Indeed.
There's no question of anything else. Kilvinder, are staffing levels in the offender management hubs in the National Security Division up to strength to keep their caseloads manageable? Lord Harris identified as necessary in his 2022 report for effective management of terrorist offenders.
Yes, I used to be the national lead for terrorism and serious organised crime, but a separate division was created. My colleague Sarah Robinson is the deputy director for there, and the priority has been to ensure that that department is fully staffed. So each region has lost staff from the regions to be able to ensure that's resourced fully.
Okay, well that gives us confidence. Did you want to come back in on this?
If I may, Chair, just to say
yes.
in relation to that particular point, I've spoken to colleagues within the MPS that operate in partnership, and they believe they've got an excellent, quoting, an excellent working relationship with a shared vision and excellent collaboration. And that's based on some of the activity taken, and there's been some really good joint working around that area, around the first national conference, around some of the vetting aspects, which is all combined to give a really effective working relationship.
Well, that's good news, because in that area, that's absolutely what we need and all of us want. So thank you for that. I'm going to pass over now to Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. I think you already answered this question, Nick, but I should still put this to you. So Lord Harris identified the 30 convicted terrorists have been released or are due to be released from prison between March 2021 and March 2025. How confident are you in your joint capacity to monitor those convicted of terrorism offences who are released into London communities effectively?
Thank you. So I think it's good to add that it's an indication of numbers as opposed to a specific number. But regardless of that, the MPS has confidence, and hopefully for the reasons I mentioned a second ago, that jointly with probation's the National Security Division, we will absolutely be able to manage those effectively on release. And again, there's some significant work that's been undertaken in order to make sure that we are well versed in that partnership space.
Any thoughts from you, Kilvinder?
When I arrived in London 5 years ago, I think one of the things that was really impressive is to work with the Metropolitan Police, and I always get the number wrong, SO15. Yeah, I say 13, but SO15. In relation to work, sorry?
I just said inflation.
The work that we do in terms of that MAPA level 3 high risk cases that are the relevant people around the table. So yeah, I think it's a lot of positive work.
If I can come back to you again, Nick, have you seen any improvement in how high risk of harm offenders are managed in the community by probation since the reunification of services? And if so, in what ways?
Yeah, apologies, I sound like I'm repeating myself in that I think since reunification, when you look at the high harm aspects, whether that's through the MAPA or the MARIC, apologies for the number of algorithms, or the sex offenders, etc. We work effectively well together. There are always challenges, and that comes back down to the same point that we've spoken about several times this morning around capacity and resourcing. But ultimately, we have cases, some really good cases around stalking and the Stalking Threat Assessment Centre and the the co-working there around integrated offender management, which predominantly, I appreciate, deals with medium and lower risk. But I think when you look at, for example, MARAC around domestic abuse and high-risk offenders there's probation attendants at all 32 of the MARACs across London, and they continue to provide that really valuable input and data sharing in order to manage and fight against domestic abuse. When it comes to MAPA, we know we work very closely around the releases of those, especially the management of level 2 and level 3 offenders that perhaps aren't picked up elsewhere, for example, if they're violent offenders as opposed to sex offenders in the jigsaw unit. So there are countless examples of really effective working, but as I say, it's not all without challenge. We continue to see a rising demand, and we need to factor that in against a reducing capacity.
Okay. So on the issue of MAPA, can I ask you, Kilvinder, so what progress have you made in improving cooperation between the various MAPA multi-agency public protection arrangements between the different agencies?
So we have the MAPA Strategic Management Board with all the partners around the table. The chair has just recently retired, and we've got a new one now. But again, one of the best examples, I think, that chair work they did was bring all the housing around the table and got an agreement with all the housing departments in terms of support to manage those risky individuals. One of the things I'm always want to say is that we don't eliminate risk, we manage it. And I think so managing those high-risk, complex cases has to be a partnership role. You know, we talked about mental health, you could talk about substance misuse, you can talk about accommodation. The MAPA Strategic Management Board is to bring all those individuals around the table, so it is a collaborative approach to manage that risk. So, and I support that MAPA Senior SMB, that Strategic Management Board, by having people around that table and having the coordination team.
Thank you. And the last question from me is to all of you. If I can start off with you, Katie, maybe. How effective is integrated offender management in London? And in what ways has the revised framework helped improve how probation and the police work together to reduce repeat offending?
Yeah, thank you. I think the move from integrated offender management that wasn't that integrated because it was working with two different probation organisations to now properly, I think, integrated offender management has been really positive. And the feedback we've had from members across London is that they believe that the system is now working well as they expect it to be. So they think, I think the overall feedback is that this is working well. This is an example of good partnership working. It's working well across all the PDUs in London, and I think that there is a real positivity around that being properly integrated now. Obviously, all of the services are being impacted by lack of staffing, but this is one where the partnership working is really positive, and that takes away some of the impact of lack of staffing in some places. And I think that while in some areas, in some boroughs, you have different services that are available to call on in the community, and that sometimes leads to the perception of kind of almost a postcode lottery. So if you're in this borough and you have these needs, they will be met, but maybe not if you're somewhere else. But there's real effort to address that, I think, through the new commissioning powers that the Probation Service has, and that ability to bring in partners where they are needed. And I think that over time, and it will take a little bit of time, the twin sort of approach of bringing in the right partners and making sure you've got the right partners in place to support people, and firming up the staffing on the probation side, which we believe steady state staffing is due by 2026, then that will deliver, you know, a really outstanding integrated offender management system, which is what we are aiming to get back to. But definitely it's one of the more positive aspects of work from the feedback from our members.
Thank you. Nick?
Yeah, so I think, as we've said, the one service obviously simplifies the communications and allows for that, the ability to mirror. We know that, for example, in the mirroring each of the MPS, Integrated Offender Management teams, we obviously have a sister team within London Probation Service, and each of the 32 borough-based programmes or schemes have assigned probation officers, and it's clear that the London Probation Service governance is clear and aligned to ourselves. I think the assistance of the MOPAC framework it sounds simple, but it's very clear on who is responsible for what elements, and I think that helps with that. I suppose, if I may, when we look at the average reoffending rate for IOM over the last 5 years, or an IOM cohort over the last 5 years, it's about 30%. And our recent figures will show the current reoffending rate is 25% with that cohort. So there's obviously effective partnership working, identifying some of the issues, responding to that, and making sure that that newer, truly integrated approach is working, or certainly seems to be working, and heading in the right direction when we see that 5% reduction in reoffending rates.
Well, that's very nice to hear. So, I mean, obviously, the new, as Nick mentioned, the new IOM framework, the second one, was sort of led by Deputy Mayor and MOPAC, very much in its convening role. So it's nice to hear it's having the impact that we want from partners. I mean, what always strikes me about IOM, I suppose, is that, you know, offenders that have 11 or more previous offences are about sort of 38% of the total London population of offenders, but they commit over 75% of the proven offences. So that's why IOM is so important. I think sometimes we think low and medium risk, you know, is less important than high risk, but actually when you think about the impact on crime on Londoners, it's very much those cases. So that's why IOM is so important. And you know, again, back to where we started with reunification, you know, just having one agency to work with on IOM is making a huge difference. I think the other thing in London is it's not just burglary and robbery. You know, IOM is a national framework, but we've been able in London to flex it. And I think having violence as our top index in London is really important. And again, that speaks to, you know, the main concerns that Londoners have about crime in London. So I think that's really important. In fact, the proportion of IOM eligible cases, I think, has gone from 10 to 40% in terms of violence index. So, you know, we're working with I think, broadly speaking, you know, the offenders that are going to have the biggest impact. Also, I just want to say one more thing about is 31% of IOM cases are recorded as domestic abuse perpetrators, DA perpetrators. Clearly, you know, the Mayor has just launched the new VORG strategy. It's another really important group. You know, if we don't tackle perpetrators and reoffending and perpetrators, then we won't be able to have the impact that we want in our wider VORG areas. So really great to hear from partners that it's going well. That's the feedback that we get. And I think it's one of the most important tools in our arsenal, frankly.
Thank you. Finally, Kilvinder.
I just agree. I think we do need to look at that high level prolific offenders in addition to our high risk serious harm offenders, and I think having the MAPA and the IOM and within that, you know, the serious group offending, the violence reduction work. I mean, there's so many partnerships. The one we haven't mentioned today, which I hope will get mentioned at some point, is the Youth to Adulthood Transition Hub that we're piloting in Newham. Just looking at a completely different way of working with these young, vulnerable individuals. You don't become an adult at 18, as I think we all know, and actually how we can work with them collectively in that trauma-based approach, with the mental health services there, with the teachers there, with education training there. You know, the early signs of that is very, very positive. And actually, if we do that well, if we do the youth to adult transition well, I think we'll see less violent crime after that, because we'll be targeting these young, vulnerable people who are traumatised. And when you look at assessments of people who commit some horrendous offences, you will see a pattern of trauma in their lives. So I'm just trying to kind of open this up to lots of amazing partnership work that we're doing, piloting, but actually we need to mainstream it.
Chair, I think it would be useful to get some further, some statistics or further information about the new sort of project.
It is literally just being reviewed now. It's, yeah,
there is. For about a year now, I think.
Has it been about a year? Just less, I think.
Just less than a year, yeah. So we started just, I think, the first cohort, the first young people started work in October, but I don't think the hub was fully up and running until the end of November, beginning of December.
It's the COVID really stop-start elements of it, so that's why I'm just not quite clear on that. I mean, I've been to visit it twice. I've spoken to the people on probation, the young people in there, and just the way the whole office space, the atmosphere, the workers. It's just the way for us to go, and I just hope we can do that across the piece.
Okay. Thanks.
It's exciting, isn't it? And perhaps that's something we could all go and visit at some point, because
they'd love you to come.
We really need to sort out cause and prevention is better than anything else. Okay, our last section now is working with private, voluntary and community sector organisations, and it's going to be taken by Assembly Member Pigeon.
Lovely, thank you. Actually, can I just fit in a question here? I'm not sure it fitted anywhere, but I wanted to pick up about data. So before the probation service split a few years ago, you used to share data with MOPAC and the GLA Safe Stats team, which helped inform projects and programmes. This stopped when, the split happened, and it's not recommenced. I'm just wondering whether this is something that Kilvinder, you'll be picking up and working with the GLA to share this data again as soon as possible.
Can I just check, do you mean the needs assessments, the data around individuals' needs, or do you mean other kind of service level agreement data? Because we are sharing the needs assessments, people's individual needs, be it drugs, relationships, etc. So I think it's the other data. I don't think it is that. It's I think it's the latter. The service level agreement
data. Yes, I think so, and some other in order that the GLA Safe Stats team can properly analyse.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
maybe Will, you could pick that up outside. I think using sharing data is so valuable at all sorts of levels. Different types of data can really help you target your service. I just wanted to make sure that was picked up. It's something that was lost in the past. So looking at, and you've obviously all looked back at our previous meeting, which I thank you for, because that's meant that this morning you've sort of almost answered some of our questions and picked up some of the discussion from that. If I start with you, Will, are you confident that you know which sort of voluntary and community sector services are out there in London that are available, and how these can support people on probation? Because it feels like there's a huge number out there and I'm not convinced. Have you thought about mapping these, for example?
Well, I think in MOPAC's role, we wouldn't necessarily know the totality of those services, and I think in terms of probation, and specifically work with offenders. I think what we do, and I chair something called the Reducing Reoffending Board, which is part of that structure I mentioned earlier, the LCJB and LCRB. As part of that, we have VCS representation on it, and we're looking to establish a provider forum, which the voluntary sector themselves are going to lead on, to try and help us make those links. I suppose in terms of the totality of service mapping, when I've done that in previous lives, that's been an enormous undertaking. And keeping it up to date is an enormous undertaking. So I think if there was a real reason to do it, it might be a useful thing to do. I think in terms of the sort of breadth of providers across London, I think we're actually really good at engaging with them as a commissioner. And you definitely heard from, I know you heard countering views in that 20, but in last time you met. But I think you heard many people actually saying that MOPAC was really good at engaging BCS organisations, and that's always heartening to hear.
What about you, Kilvinder? Are you confident you know what's out there?
No, but we do meet with Clinks quarterly, and so they're that outreach service for us. So we hold roundtables that are organised by Clinks, so that they can access all those third sector charities, etc., so that we can talk to them. We've had a number of engagement sessions with them. So we've also had, I'm trying to remember the name of an organisation. Again, sorry, I can't rely on my memory today. It's a Black Enterprise scheme, and they convened a meeting with us with a number of organisations that have been set up and led by people from Black and Asian communities, and looking at how we can work with that group. We're also working with people very early from the private sector, looking at how they can support us, do some myth busting, particularly around the Asian community, around domestic abuse and alcohol use. So I can't say that I'm 100% there in terms of what everything London has to offer, but we are linked into organisations who can do that for us.
Excellent. That sounds really promising. Katie, how do probation staff keep, on top of the available community services in the area they work?
With great difficulty.
Yes.
I think having both the answers before, I think just show how challenging this is, and it is with great difficulty. I have to say that having the partnership and commissioning arrangements back in the probation service do help, because I think under the previous arrangements with the CRCs doing all of the commissioning and partnership work, and the National Probation Service accessing that through the CRCs, probation staff in the National Probation Service felt very, very removed from it, and felt there was a real lack of information. It's a bit better now, but it's very complicated. And often, we work in probation delivery units that are organised within boroughs, and that's an important and obvious logical structure to have. However, not everyone lives in a neat bubble, so people might live in an area, but actually there are services kind of cross-border that would be more appropriate for them, and that can be a massive challenge for probation staff to know what is in the next door PDU, probation delivery unit, never mind what's in another borough and what might be available to people. So those kind of things are a huge challenge and actually take an enormous amount of time for probation staff. And if you think, if I'm a probation officer struggling to find it in my team, well, there are, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 other probation officers struggling to find the same information. And often we're repeating the same things. We're all doing the same things to try and find the same single piece of information. And anything that can be done to improve that access for probation staff to the partnership arrangements to other resources in the communities that we serve is really valuable.
Absolutely. Kilvinder, do you want to pick that up? Is there some way that you can help sort of map this or provide that sort of comprehensive list?
Yeah, absolutely. And not to be flippant, I think this has been around for decades, this issue. I think the difference now, you've got the internet, which does help a lot more than when we used to have to go through telephone directories. One of the things is we do now deliver day one services, so we have got provision for ETE, the accommodation advice and health and wellbeing, and they can coordinate some of that. We've got the day two services, which are around debts and benefits and that dependency to recovery. Again, those partners can support us in finding those local connections, and the probation practitioner won't need to do that. We've got the Regional Outcome Innovation Fund, and I've tasked each of my heads of services, the 18, to be out there in their local communities, talking to their staff. What do we need? We've got the needs assessments, and whilst a lot of people don't like our assessment tool, which is called Oasis, one of the positive things it does highlight the needs of the cohorts living in these areas. So I do take Katie's point absolutely, that sometimes there may be something over the borough line that might be more helpful, and we do need to have a smarter intranet that will allow us to look at that. But it is about the conversations as well to make sure that the staff are talking to their heads of service, so we're commissioning services or looking at services or directing across the piece.
Lovely, thank you for that. Now you all have seen in the transcript from our last meeting lots of concerns about the dynamic framework. We heard that it's felt to be inaccessible, precluded many of London's specialist and voluntary organisations, and there was obviously an independent review nationally that said that it was a commercial procurement model ill-suited to funding small and specialist organisations. So do you agree with our guests that at our last meeting that it is overly bureaucratic, and what are you doing to ensure smaller organisations can overcome this bureaucracy in order they can deliver these specialist local services that we need?
I think I'd first of all say if that's their experience, then that's their experience, and I wouldn't countermand that. There's been a lot of conversations at the Ministry of Justice and HMPPS about how to make this easier. There's conversations at the moment about how to use grant funding in addition to co-commissioning. So just if we want those smaller organisations, and we still have to do the due diligence piece of work, and looking at if we can grant fund them. So that's been explored, and we're hoping to hear a conclusion of that in the next week or two. That's how close we are to that. And so, I think there's a lot of work being done to make the whole dynamic framework a lot easier for the smaller organisations. We're also helping them, so with the work with Clinks, and direct contact with some of these organisations, working with them to see what we can do as well to support that process.
Lovely, thank you. And we'll come to you on that.
Thanks. I was going to come in. I mean, I think the challenge of the dynamic framework, was that that something they had to come up with something that would work as well for London as it would for Rutland or Wiltshire, and they probably don't have the breadth of providers. So it is an inelegant solution. I think that Kilvinder mentioned co-commissioning, and this is something I think is really important. So. You've heard about our women's services, and you heard from many of them last time. We are doing that co-commissioning now of the women's service through the dynamic framework. But because of MOPAC's experience and expertise, and because of the learning from the first round, we've been able to use that in a way. I can't talk too much about it because it's a live procurement, but we've been able to do it in a way that ensured that small providers weren't excluded. So this is why I think co-commissioning is really important. We've got to use our combined expertise here, and I don't want to suggest further recommendations from the Assembly, but this is exactly the sort of thing that I think we need more of. We need us working in consort. You've heard about all our good partnership working. I think that should personally, and this is a personal view, extend to the commissioning of services in London.
But we also did hear last time that voluntary organisations thought MOPAC's commissioning process was challenging for smaller organisations. We've heard that before, the work you've done on victims and so on, different commissioning, but actually some of the very smaller organisations are concerned about that. So co-commissioning is obviously something you're going for at the moment, but how are you making sure that any commissioning you do is genuinely open and inclusive for these smaller organisations so they can play their role in delivering services?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that there is a balance to be struck. So, I suppose what MOPAC tries to do and advise the Deputy Mayor about is the best way to deliver outcomes for Londoners. Clearly, we believe in many of those cases the best way to deliver those outcomes will be smaller organisations, will be by and for organisations. So I suppose my experience, and I can't speak to the period, I can't speak to the past. MOPAC's been going, I think it's going to have its 10-year anniversary. Maybe it's older. Apologies,
no,
I should know
10.
that.
It's just
10,
over
isn't it?
10 years. Yes,
yeah, just over 10. We're planning a
2012,
celebration. So, but I definitely think in the last couple of years, I think about things like the Vaughan Grassroots Fund, which I know you've heard about before. That was specifically designed with the sector to enable that to happen. I think that's a really good example. I think the use of consortia and encouraging consortia to bid. So we've seen that in the women's offending services we have now. You heard from Nikki last time, who's a big part of that. But that's a consortia of small organisations coming together. So I think there are loads of really good examples at MOPAC. And what I'm always keen to hear is, I obviously get a certain view from the market when I speak to them. I've got to be honest, I'm not just saying this. It's normally really positive about how good we are at encouraging small organisations to come forward. Things like the Victim Small Grant Fund, the Grassroots Fund, with loads of examples. But I'm always happy to go back to people and talk to them. So I suppose I didn't necessarily recognise that feedback, I have to be honest, but obviously I take it seriously, and I'll be talking to some of those organisations myself.
But you're trying to diversify the different ways that people can bid for funding for their work in order to support smaller groups in London.
Yeah, absolutely. We're always trying to do that. I mean, the other thing I'd say about MOPAC's commissioning, though, is we don't always have free choice. No. So often, particularly, we're moving slightly away from probation, but in other parts of our forest, we get lots of money that the MOJ, gives us with strings. Oh, yeah. I'm thinking particularly about a recent round of ISVA funding where, we are asked to do a process in a certain way, and then distribute the money in a certain way. So we still try and use as much influence and discretion as possible, you know, to allow that to go to the providers that we think will be able to have the biggest impact. And certainly in that space, that is going to be small buy-in for organisations. So we do our best with the process, but often, you know, it is a process not of MOPAC's design.
Lovely. Okay, it's been really helpful. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm very aware that we've asked hardly any questions of you, Commander John. Is there anything that you would like to say regarding probation, or anything you would like to point out to the committee?
Firstly, not a problem at all. I think the main points that I want to make, I feel I've been able to make due to the time you've allowed me, around the fact that we do, everything isn't always as great as it could be. We can always make improvements. We recognise where those improvements are, and we're working tirelessly in partnership to address those, namely around demand and capacity, which we've all mentioned many times. So whether it's with MOPAC, whether it's with the London Probation Service, I do feel there are some really strong partnerships that are working towards supporting offenders and reducing reoffending, managing high risk and high harm. And you know, and I hope that's come across today with regards to how effective some of the partnerships are at all the levels within our responsibilities and remits.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much for that. And that brings our meeting nearly to a close. So I'd really genuinely like to thank our guests for attending the meeting today and for participating in this discussion. I have noted that if different training could be provided in some ways, I think that would be helpful. I certainly heard that from Katie. More staffing from all of you, and of course we'll await the inspector's report, but mindful of the fact that it's gone in only 6 months after this all started, or at least the cases are looking at that. So we'll certainly be taking an interest in that, because the committee's been very, very, very interested in this whole subject. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Thank you. Can we also delegate authority to me as chairman, in consultation with party group lead members, to agree any output arising from the meeting? Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the work programme for 22-23 Assembly year? Thank you. The next meeting of this committee is scheduled for Wednesday the 14th of September 2022 at 10 a.m. in the Chamber, City Hall. I have no urgent business, which concludes today's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.